Good afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome to this CDP Ireland Network webinar titled The Latest Trends in Corporate Climate Change Reporting. We've been chatting with a group earlier on about the challenges of corporate climate change reporting and whether it's a soup or a landscape or just a range of issues that we're struggling to deal with, but it's certainly a very dynamic space. So delighted to have a group of experts along with us today to help us understand the challenge of corporate climate reporting. Obviously, this is an event being hosted as part of Climate Finance Week, and congrats to the team behind this and to AIB for their sponsorship. It's been a really fascinating week, so I hope you're enjoying it and will join many other events. My name is Brian O'Kennedy, and we're the executive behind the CDP Ireland Network. And for those of you who don't know the CDP Ireland Network, we're a group of reporting companies and investors and support organizations working to help companies to navigate the challenge of managing climate change in their business. So if you're interested, we have a LinkedIn group, or you can contact us directly on the website, CDP Ireland Network. Today's about an overview of the latest global climate reporting frameworks and standards. We have CDSB coming down the track. CDSB are represented, EFRAC, TCFT, SASB, and the SDGs. Lots of different challenges for companies to try and grapple with. And obviously, we're seeing a convergence of non-financial reporting and financial reporting. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And as companies obviously merge their ESG strategies with their wider value and financial reporting. The past year has heralded a raft of new initiatives in corporate climate reporting. And we're starting to see initiatives at the regulatory spaces, the EU and UK and New Zealand and other countries start to develop their own reporting requirements in this space, which again presents a challenge for many organizations. So today we're going to have an introduction from Shay McGann, who's at Clearstream Solutions. She's our sustainability reporting lead. And Shay's going to give us an overview of what the latest trends are and what we see coming down the track over the next year or so. And then we're going to kick it straight into the panel discussion. And as I said, delighted to have some real experts in this space today. We have Gemma Clements, who's the Capacity Building and Engagement Manager at CDSB, a sibling of organization of CDP. George Harrington, who's a Corporate Stakeholder and Engagement Manager at GRI. And GRI obviously is the world's leading reporting framework in terms of ESG. And we're going to get a really interesting perspective, I'm sure, from George as to what's happening at GRI and how GRI is aligning with a lot of the other frameworks. And finally, we have the practitioner. We have Sarah Dempsey, who's at the coalface trying to manage all of these challenges and set an organization structure and governance around this. So looking forward to the panel discussion. So I'm going to hand straight over to Shay. We are recording the session. There will be a number of slides shared afterwards with you. And if you have any questions, please, you can put them in the chat box and we'll try and get to them towards the end of the panel discussion. So thank you very much. Over to you, Shay.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everyone. I'm Shay McGann, and as Brian said, I'm responsible for sustainability and strategy at Clearstream Solutions. So I just want to take you through, I suppose, the overall sustainability landscape and what's happening. So just to give you a perspective from the corporate view, there's lots coming down the track from a global perspective, I suppose. The IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, is now establishing International Sustainability Standards Board, or ISSB. And this is going to launch at COP26. Then, as Brian mentioned, there's also mandatory climate risk being brought in by various countries. The UK and New Zealand have already committed to that. The World Economic Forum have developed their own set of ESG metrics, which companies are already adopting and using. And And then also there's increased UK regulation, and this is, I suppose, important for lots of Irish companies to kind of stay in tune with what's happening in the UK. So you've got the streamlined energy and carbon reporting, the SEC, and then there's other procurement regulations coming in that, say for government tenders, that will require companies to have carbon reduction plans in place. So yeah, as we mentioned, this global reporting standard is coming, and the standards board will be announced later this month at COP, and they're planning on publishing their first set of standards later in kind of summer 2022. I think it's worth noting, though, that the global standards board are working closely with all the main reporting organizations, kind of the CDP, GRI, the Value Reporting Foundation and CDSB, also with the EU and the World Economic Forum. So then from an EU reporting regulation, the EU are kind of driving on they don't really want to wait for what's happening at a global level, but I think it will all align. They in April announced that the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive would replace the Non-Financial Reporting Directive. So it's interesting, just the change in the use of terms away from non-financial. But I suppose what's sitting behind that directive is EFRAG. So they're the European Financial Reporting Advisory Group, and that they've been tasked with developing the standards out. And they also announced a statement of cooperation with GRI. So again, all of these different standards and bodies are working together. And just to note on the directive itself, it's going to cover a much wider group of companies than the old NFRD covered. And there'll also be requirements for assurance. And we expect to see kind of the first of those reports coming through in 2024 based on 2023 data. And also just important to note that it will complement all the other EU regulation that's happening in the space, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. And I suppose why are we doing all this? The feedback that we're getting from investors is that corporate sustainability reporting is just not sufficiently comparable or reliable. Companies currently report on whatever they want. Some aren't reporting at all, and it's really hard for investors who want to create financial ESG products to rely on the data as it currently stands. So then, just quickly from an investor perspective, why are they looking at ESG? Why has it become such a hot topic? It's been, I suppose, proven now that ESG funds are outperforming the wider market despite the kind of global trends such as COVID, and this is engaging them to participate more in ESG. Obviously, the regulation, there's a lot happening at an EU level. You've got the EU Green Deal, that policy framework that's been then supported by the Action Plan on Sustainable Finance. And then there's a whole raft of various regulations that sit under that. The taxonomy, the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is also seen as the greenwash, or preventing greenwashing financial products, climate benchmark regulation, green bonds, and there's also their corporate governance initiative. I suppose another driver is all the global targets that have been set for net zero. So obviously the Paris Agreement, and all companies are trying to set science-based targets in line with that, and in line with that 1.5 degrees of warming. 2 degrees is really becoming no longer acceptable. And they're also working on net zero target setting. So it's quite wide as to what that entails at the moment. So that's going to become more clear. And finally, there are a lot of ESG investor initiatives out there now that's driving this interest as well. So the UN have their Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. There's the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change, and obviously the UN PRI, who've been in this space for a very long time and have great resources if any of you are more interested from an investor perspective. So just from the sustainability reporting landscape, how all these various standards, principles, goals, frameworks fit together, it can be really hard for a company getting into this space. So this is just our attempt at trying to classify some of those. There's still lots of crossover, so it's by no means clear cut, but hopefully it will give you some basis to work off of. So from a global ESG goals and principles perspective, what we see companies using are generally the sustainable development goals, and they're those really high level structuring your report and showing what ones you are influencing in your business. You've then got your ESG frameworks and standards. So you see they're kind of separated into two columns there. You've got the TCFT, the integrated reporting, and CDSB. They're more frameworks. And then you've got your standards, which are SASB, GRI, and the likes of ISO. So there's just a slight distinction there. Probably more relevant to publicly quoted companies are the ESG ratings and indices, but you may see these around, or you'll read about them in people's sustainability reports, just so you're aware they're there. You have Sustainalytics, MSCI, they're the kind of big ones, and they're rating publicly quoted companies on their sustainability performance. And then this last box is, I suppose, a mismatch of everything, kind of certifications, benchmarks, and targets. You've got the likes of CDP, where you can actually benchmark your environmental performance. You've got the likes of EcoVadis and SEDEX, which are supplier programs. On the building side, you've got certifications like LEED and BREEAM. And then you've got more like that external recognition. So if you're in the food sector, you may have Origin Green, or your business in the community. Just shows your commitment to the space. So I'm just going to go through some of the main frameworks and standards. So firstly, we've GRI, and GRI are a really holistic, complete set of standards that companies use to report topics that are material to their business. So a key requirement of GRI is materiality, because they look at all topics across environment, social, and governance. And they ask you to say how your business is impacting on society. The standards are free to download. There's no scoring, so there's no cost. We've then got SASB. So they're industry-specific standards. There's 77 different industries in total. And they help companies select topics that may impact the financial performance. So SASB's we see it as nearly like a real subset of GRI, and it's topics that investors may find that are of interest to investors. And it looks at how ESG topics impact on the business. But again, it's across environmental, social, and governance topics. You've got CDP, which is different in the fact that it's a questionnaire, and it's very environmental focused. So it's asking companies to respond to a set of questions, and then you get scored, and so you can benchmark against your peers. And they also have a good supply chain program as well. So there is a cost, just because of the whole scoring process. Then got the SDGs. So really broad goals, high level, will help you structure your report and help you track against global issues, I suppose. And they're really good, I suppose, the 17 rainbow looking goals, they're good for, they were kind of developed for countries originally, but the business community have adopted them because they're so good at engaging a wide range of stakeholders. And again, it's outward looking, so how the business impacts on society. You've then got the TCFD. So these are principles and guidance around disclosing the impact of climate-related risks on your business. Again, a little bit more investor and financial focused, and all around climate risk. But again, they're just a set of principles, so you can download that framework and have a look at it and see how you can respond as a company. We've then got the UN Global Compact. So the UN Global Compact are principles as well. There's 10 of them, and they're across environmental and social topics. And then you're also asked to produce an annual progress update if you're a member of that, and there's a fee for large companies. And then finally, we've CDSB. So they're a framework for, again, environmental stuff, but wider than just climate. So you've got natural capital, water, and they've also announced a commitment to start looking at social topics as well. So that will be interesting, and we'll hear more from Gemma on that. This graph is, I suppose, is just to give you an idea of where they all sit. So what I've mapped here is prescriptiveness versus the scope. So you'll see CDP up in the top right-hand corner. So it's really prescriptive in the fact that it's a questionnaire, and the scope is quite focused. It's just environmental. And this is in comparison to, say, GRI, who are down in the bottom left-hand corner. They're broad. It's environmental, social, and governance, and economic factors as well. And they're much more flexible. You can download all the standards and you select the topics that are material to your business. And then finally, I'll just finish on this slide. So this is kind of how financial and non-financial information is coming together. So you'll see on and it's just a nice way to depict it. On the right-hand side, you've got GRI, really broad set of metrics, of topics across environment, social, and governance, considering all your stakeholders. So not just your investors, shareholders, much wider, your community, your employees, suppliers, everyone else. Then within that smallest, like as I was saying, the subset, you've got SASB and CDSB. Then you've got on the left-hand side, some of the more financially focused people will be aware of. They're your traditional financial reporting frameworks. And then in the roof of the house, you've got the integrated reporting framework, and that's a whole methodology of how you bring financial and non-financial information together in your annual report. And it's kind of where everyone will be working towards in the years to come. So I hope that has shed some light on the alphabet soup or sustainability reporting landscape. And I think at this stage, we'll just welcome the panel on to join us, and I'll welcome Brian back as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shay. I think we can back on to our panel. Thank you. Yeah, some really interesting developments there, Shay, and we'll come back to that shortly. I suppose one of the things that we're seeing that's having a massive impact is not just the investor interest, but the large corporates are now trickling down a lot of these reporting requirements to their suppliers. And obviously we have a network or interconnected network of suppliers and sub-tiers of suppliers, and things like this Science-Based Target Initiative, which is very often requiring us to look at scope 3 down through our value chains, and also to look at maybe having our suppliers set their own targets. This is really accelerating the focus on the issue, as I said, from traditionally the large publicly quoted companies down to the next level. So we're seeing a plethora of companies try to address these challenges. So very good. So I'm going to move on to the panel section. And as I said, we really have a fascinating an expert group of panelists today. And I'm going to start with you, Gemma, from CDSB. You're very welcome. I mean, Gemma, you've been involved in a whole range of projects, including the reporting exchange and publications on non-financial reporting. And your current role, you're managing the TCFT Knowledge Hub. So I know we're going to be really interested in that. But maybe you could start, Gemma, by just explaining to us the role of CDSB and what it is and how what role you're playing in terms of engaging on climate reporting.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you, Brian, and everyone that's for having me today to speak to you about this. So the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, CDSB, we've been thinking about how to integrate climate risk and opportunity, impacts and dependencies into the annual mainstream report and accounts with the same rigor as financial information for the last 13, 14 years now. We were set up at Davos at the World Economic Forum in 2007 in the absence of a globally accepted accounting framework for climate-related financial disclosures. And we were set up by a visionary group of business and environmental NGOs that saw that link between climate change and financial performance. Just as an indication kind of our relationship with CDP, so the CDSB Secretariat is hosted by CDP in London and in Berlin, so we are very much connected to our colleagues at CDP. And we offer, we kind of try to reach our mission in terms of integrating this information through our framework for reporting environmental and climate information in the mainstream report. And that's where CDSB is slightly different to some of the other frameworks that we very much focus on mainstream reporting and financial reporting. So when the TCFD was set up in 2015, one of the things that was very clear was how aligned their mission was and how aligned their recommendations were to the CDSB framework. And in fact, when the TCFD was set up in 2015, they say that they were building upon existing reporting standards like the CDSB one and GRI and others. And we've been working very closely with the TCFD to drive TCFD implementation. So as you mentioned, Brian, I created and I managed the TCFD Knowledge Hub on behalf of the TCFD. So we work in driving that kind of mainstream financial, climate-related financial disclosure agenda forward. And in terms of our relationship with the other standards, we are very much complementary to the other reporting requirements. I think one of the things that we get asked a lot, and as you mentioned before, the alphabet soup, the landscape, all of these kind of complexities, is all of these standards exist for a reason. There's a purpose for why there's so many of them out there. We all have slightly different aspects that we're focusing on. As you outlined, Shay, we have different audiences, different definitions for materiality. So we all exist for different reasons, and we are very much all complementary. And one of the things that I very much recommend that everybody goes to take a look at if they're interested in this is a few years ago, we worked with CDP, GRI, SASB and the Integrated Reporting Council, who are now Value Reporting Foundation. We worked together as part of the Corporate Reporting Dialogue to complete a comprehensive mapping of all of the frameworks under the umbrella of the TCFD. So we tried to indicate how we're all aligned that way through that document.
Excellent. That's really really interesting, Gemma, and I'm fascinated with this alignment. We'll come back to that because interestingly, one of the challenges that we've seen is that companies are increasingly competing in the space in this ESG, and as to and they're competing for investment funds, they're competing for customers, they're competing for employees. So it's now a competitive space, and I think that's also driving a lot of these new initiatives. Everybody wants to have the newest, shiniest new thing. So I'll be interested in coming back to you on that one. But speaking of new and shiny, George Harrison, very welcome back again, George Harrington. George, I saw you smiling there. We promised we wouldn't use alphabet soup, and we've all done it. But so fire ahead and use alphabet soup, George. But George, you're obviously representing the GRI, and so GRI, as we know, is one of the longest established frameworks and most recognized frameworks in terms of ESG and climate reporting. But you've also been developing some new and universal standards. So really interested to hear about that. But maybe for people who are not necessarily that familiar with GRI, you give us a little insight into what GRI does, and then what's happening at GRI at the moment in terms of the latest standards.
Thanks, Brian, for the introduction, and great to be part of this event and this conference and week of exciting events as well. I don't know if I can give much of a better introduction than Shay provided GRI, but yeah, so the Global Reporting Initiative has developed and continues to develop our core product, which is the GRI Standards. And these are indeed the standards that organizations can use to identify their material topics. And these material topics they can report on in the element, or really in the hope to make sure that all of their stakeholders' views are accounted for, and that the real idea is that they're focusing on their impact externally. So the organization's operations, the outcomes, and how those impact the environment, the economy, and society as a whole. So that's another short summary on that. But as you said, it is indeed an exciting time from our side. I know a lot of reporting organizations, and Sarah being representing here, are kind of aware that a week ago we launched the new or updated universal standards. So very much the foundation of reporting with the GRI standards. And it's introduced a lot of very important and key changes. So I do know that some of our stakeholders are saying, well, now you've changed it again. The key part isn't about necessarily the changing, it's about the constant work involved in developing and improving. Because what's been great is that GRI has been and continues to be the leading reporting framework for organizations around the world, regardless of sector and size. But that means that as more companies are using it, that our stakeholders that use our product are also growing. The amount of people at the table with the conversation continues, but the world, as we know, continues to also progress. And there are new discoveries, new research completed. And what's important from the standards is that we use our modular structure, which is another key element, to keep up to date, to ensure that our standards remain not only compatible with standards that exist or ones that are coming up, but also that they're asking the right information. And this has been a big part of this update. I think one of the areas that we definitely focused on with this work is to ensure that there is more comprehensive human rights disclosure included throughout the foundation. So not just as a topic-specific standard, but very much as all organizations kind of raising that human rights disclosure bar. We also introduced due diligence for organizations to be able to report on that more clearly. We have provided a lot of key concepts like materiality, so material topics, and how companies will be able to help define what is material to them. And it's through these updates, through providing further clarity, that allows not only organizations that use our standards to improve their reports, but also for companies that are curious about the GRI standards, that are coming to the table, that are coming to the conversation, to really have the most up-to-date and the clearest, as clear as can be, opportunity to use our framework to report on the wide array, as Shay said, holistic, a very, very big array of impacts that they have externally. Because, and I love that graph that you use, Shay, where it shows the sustainability. This is the idea of double materiality. The sustainability impacts that the organization is having externally feeds in to the financial impacts on the company, and what people are probably more familiar with reporting that historically. So I may have waffled on a little bit there, Brian, but trying to cover a lot of ground in a shorter period of time.
No, and we'll come back to some of that alignment between financial and non-financial afterwards. I think that's really key and very interesting. We're hearing that companies are now bringing ESG into the core of their business. And it's not something which is peripheral anymore. So that's why it becomes so critical that we align our financial and non-financial. So that's a great segue on to AIB, who are obviously managing that challenge, and to Sarah Dempsey, who's head of sustainability, communications and partnership. And I know, Sarah, you head up a team, a small team, but if I might say, the work that you've produced in terms of reporting, we use your sustainability report as a case study. And again, in terms of financial reporting, I think AIB is an A-lister on CDP. So you've definitely shown leadership in many of these areas. So I'm really interested about the journey that you've been on, Sarah, in terms of, I don't know how long you're doing sustainability reports and how long AIB is reporting, but I know you've been across lots of different organizations from RBS in this space. So really interested to hear about the journey that AIB has been on in terms of its sustainability reporting.
Great. Thanks, Brian. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Super. Yeah. So, gosh, AIB. So we, I suppose what I'll do just in the next couple of minutes is probably try and just put some practical kind of narrative around what both Gemma and George have been kind of talking to. We have been reporting, as you know, to CDP actually since 2014. And as you say, we are currently A-listed. In terms of sustainability reporting, we produced our first report for the full year 2016. And from the get-go, we wanted to set ourselves pretty high standards and report to best practice. And we started reporting for the full year 2016 to GRI Standards, and it was based on an independent materiality process that we undertook. So from the get-go, we kind of set ourselves up, we thought, for best practice. And that was full year 16. Full year 2018, we brought it on a level, had to, in terms of the non-financial reporting directive. So we reported against that for the first time in 2018. We also in 2018 then did a refresh of the materiality, because while obviously with a business like ours, there is ongoing stakeholder engagement in terms of our stakeholder sets, actually kind of putting a stake in the ground and getting that independently assured and done every 2 years is best practice. So again, it was done for the 2018. Last year, for the first time, we reported against the TCFT. We became the first Irish bank to sign up to TCFT, so we reported against that, and the UNEPFI. So they were full year 2020. And then next year, we will report for the first time against the WEF stakeholder capitalism metrics, which we signed up to at the start of this year. And I can talk about why we did that possibly later on, and the UN Global Compact. So kind of and right throughout that journey, as I say, we set ourselves a high bar, because we said if we were going to do it, we wanted to do it right, responding to the issues that mattered to our stakeholders, and that it enabled both kind of mandatory reporting, which continues to evolve, and voluntary reporting, which we feel is relevant for our business, but really trying to align them where we possibly can, which isn't always easy. All the time, every report has been independently assured by Deloitte. Again, setting ourselves up for success, we believe. And the reporting, the sustainability reporting that we do, and that is not just our kind of our annual report, but our ongoing kind of market updates, now follow the same journey and governance that our annual financial report follows. So there is ever-growing greater alignment between the two as part of our overall suite of reporting materials. So it's been, a journey probably of kind of 4 or 5 years, and every year we have continued to kind of challenge ourselves to respond to the market as this issue has gone, as you say, from being kind of quite peripheral, where many were kind of wondering what were we doing and scratching their heads, to where the conversation is now, which is kind of central to the corporate narrative for many.
Excellent, and I'm looking forward to talking a little bit more about how you're managing that governance and bringing together your organization. But maybe back to you, Gemma. One of the questions that we get asked a lot is about TCFT, and how detailed do we need to be in our TCFT responses, and what's the expectation? And I know that CDP is a great start, because CDP obviously largely has the TCFT framework, inside, built into it. But then when it comes to actually disclosing and reporting that out, companies are not clear as to how much additional detail. And can you give us a view on sort of how companies should approach that if they are starting to take up TCFT reporting, and then maybe what that journey looks like from starting to being really really good at this?
Yeah, that's a question we get very often as well. And I think, to start off with, I agree that CDP is a great place to start. It provides the structure and the questions in order to be able to ensure that you've covered all the different elements. And I'm just name dropping loads of different reports today. This is my TCFT Knowledge Hub brain on, when I've got loads of different resources that I can share with you all. last year, CDSB and CDP created a report called Building Blocks. And it's that exact idea that you take a building blocks approach. You can start with CDP and then use the CDSB framework, for example, in order to be able to disclose the relevant information in your annual report. I think one of the key things to understand and accept is that we don't expect companies to be able to do all of this immediately, and we don't expect everything that goes in your CDP disclosure to then go into your annual report. It's not feasible, it's not practical, and we also don't want annual reports to be hundreds of pages long. I think the longest report I've had to read is about 700 pages, and we don't encourage that. We encourage kind of concise information that is clearly signposted to various places. So one great approach that we've seen from a number of companies is including a dashboard or a reference table, similar to how GRI have the reference tables as well, and making sure that you're then indicating where in your either annual report, in your CDP disclosure, if it's publicly available, or if you have a separate sustainability report or TCFD or climate report, making sure that if you have multiple reports or multiple places where this information is, that you're referencing to where that is. Again, the most I've seen is a company who provided 7 different documents with the information spread across, and they didn't have that referencing. So it was very difficult for me to be able to find that. And I think kind of on your last point about kind of where to go to then get to kind of expertise level, I think it's also important to note that there is no company out there, no matter how good there's some really good examples out there, but no company has fully aligned to the TCFD. And I think understanding that this is a journey and that this has to be reiterated year on year in order to kind of get a full understanding of what climate change is and how that's going to impact on your business, have to have that appreciation. And in the TCFD status report last year in 2020, so they released it in November 2020, they created a illustrative roadmap, an implementation guide. So they highlighted the areas that they feel that companies should start and working their way down to fully enhanced and aligned disclosure. And really starting with the kind of internal processes and thinking about your governance and your risk management and being able to set that internally first and then disclose that information, and then working your way down to that really challenging scenario analysis and the piece on resilience. I think we would, as I said before, we don't expect companies to be able to do all of this in one go. There's lots of resources out there to help you, and to embrace the uncertainty of climate change and be transparent about what you're trying to do through your disclosure. No matter which reporting framework you use, it's about that transparency, and it's about being able to tell your story and explain to whether it's your investors or your wider stakeholders exactly what it is that you're doing and how all of these things are interconnected.
Gemma, you used a fascinating term there, embrace the uncertainty. And I think that's one of the big challenges that a lot of companies have when they try to integrate between the non-financial issues and the financial issues. They're not really allowed to embrace the uncertainty of financial reporting. And there's an expectation that will be ambitious in terms of non-financial, but I'd love to come back and explore that a bit. I think there's a really interesting balance and challenge for a lot of companies in that space as to how ambitious they should be around non-financial issues and therefore, but very practical in terms of the financial reporting. And George, I think that it brings us on to an interesting conversation. We talked about GRI and how GRI is feeding into things like CSRD and the development of the EU reporting requirements. But also, we get asked a lot of questions about, do I need to report to SASB and GRI, or should I pick one or the other? And SASB very, I suppose, in some sense is very prescriptive, and it does the materiality for me, whereas GRI does a much broader braced approach, and I can be much more material in terms of how I address specific issues for ourselves. So maybe could you talk about how those frameworks are actually coming together, how GRI is being used potentially for non-financial disclosures, and how you look at that relationship between companies? Should they do both? Should they look to try and a balance between GRI and SASB? So I'd be interested to get your view on that.
Yeah, good question, Brian. And we do get that more and more over the last couple of years for sure. And I think Shay brought it up very well when she was going through the landscape at the beginning of this, because we also are very much of the mindset, and also aligned with what Gemma was saying, is that there are certain stakeholders that are going to require information in certain ways. And so it's not so much a question on, well, do we do one or the other, or whether we do, this one this year and the next year we'll try that one. There is an element of, well, we're going to do perhaps both, because that is what our stakeholders are going to expect or are requiring us to do. So there is a lot more of a complementary manner. And we released, I think it was a report that even Shay was mentioning earlier this year, which goes through case studies of how organizations that are reporting both with GRI and SASB. And I think this is a great resource to see how that is done in practice. Not so much the theory and the talk about it, because I think that's obviously a big part of all discussions, but also to see how organizations are doing that in reality today. So that's a resource. I'm happy to look it up when I am listening to Sarah speak, but I'll pop that in the chat for anyone as well. But that is from our perspective as well, what we kind of hope is resonating with our stakeholders. It's not an either or, it's a complementary for specific purposes. But as you mentioned, also on the EU side, and this is something that's also, very much on everyone's agenda. They want to know what's the outcome's going to be. There's information that keeps coming out on dates when things are going to be launched and whatnot. Shay was also right saying that we're very much close to this process. We're actually have been nominated to co-create the standards with the EFRAG. So that is a big role. What that means in practice is still being finalized, let's say, but it is incredibly important to acknowledge that, that companies that are worried that it's going to be a totally new framework to this landscape or puzzle or whatever people want to use to describe it, is that they're not trying to reinvent the wheel. There are frameworks and disclosure packages that exist that maybe they need to be a little bit reworded, or maybe they need to be improved to be more effective at what the CSRD is looking to, or the EFRAG is looking to require from companies in the EU. But I think that is an important part for us to make sure that we are playing as kind of the ones that have been in the ballpark the longest. We want to make sure we're supporting these initiatives and participating as appropriately.
Excellent, thanks, George. And for those companies that are already on the journey, that are reporting to CDP, that have started their TCFT journey, that have a GRI aligned report, I think our sense is that when regulation does come along, it's typically, hoovering up, I would say. Those that have maybe a little slow, we tend to see that being a little bit more limiting. So if you're actually responding already to some of those best practice programs, you're going to be well up to speed when it comes to the mandatory reporting requirements that are being set by governments. That's been traditionally our view on that. And so, Sarah, I'm really interested. Obviously, you're dealing with managing all of these challenges of what's coming next. That how did you deal with all of the challenges of keeping up to speed with all of these? And obviously, you've been successful. So I'm really interested to see what I know that. And the challenges are, we don't want to focus on the negative, but I think it's very important for the 120 or so people who are on here to hear. It's refreshing in one sense that the people like yourselves had challenges and issues to deal with. So maybe you give us perspective on what kind of challenges you faced with your non-financial reporting journey.
Yeah, sure thing. So I suppose not to focus on the negative, and I should preface kind of my answer by saying my background is actually kind of corporate affairs and stakeholder engagement. It's not science or environmental. I'm not of that background, which kind of was why I was put into the role I was put into it in terms of doing this in AIB. Because when I came in, we had never done sustainability reporting. We didn't have a sustainability team. It was a very singular team for quite some time. And the initial challenge is actually bringing people with you. and persuading them that the issue is actually relevant and it's not an add-on. And as you go across, accountants and people who run banks, the biggest challenge initially was actually trying to make whatever the kind of point we were trying to do, to make it relevant to their area of the business. So whether they were in lending, whether they were in operations, whether they were in legal and HR, actually making it relevant to their area of the business. So as you get their attention and they can see how it actually impacts them, and that it's not something that actually will pass them by, or they can just put to the side of the desk. We were very lucky in AIB in that Colin Hunt, when he took over as CEO just over 2 years ago, he then put sustainability at the heart of the strategy and included a fifth pillar, sustainable communities, in our corporate strategy. So Colin now says, actually sustainability isn't part of our strategy, it is our strategy. So he very much had kind of foresight with that in mind. And I would say, for any organization, if you don't have your leader with you, you will be challenged. So getting your leadership team behind you is absolutely essential and integral to success. Obviously, with stakeholders on all sides looking to press this agenda, both those that impact your business, like regulators, investors, and those who are impacted by your business, customers, staff, etc. It now actually has come centre stage, and that's a really good thing. The biggest challenges we've had as we've progressed, the first thing is obviously, and this is not news, is data, which is the current and future data disclosures require different data sets, and it can be very challenging to try and put your finger on exactly what you're going to need and when. And the challenge you have there, obviously, is that there's a financial investment, but there's also human capital investment in actually going against that to make sure you have what's relevant and what's correct. In terms of climate action, for a bank, it means disclosing not only our own emissions from our own operations, which actually relative to our overall emissions are very small, but actually the bigger focus is obviously on our loan book, and that up until a year or two ago was something we had never actually started to work through. So a huge amount of time in AIB, in particular in the last 12 months, has been spent actually looking at our loan book and heat mapping our loan book against high carbon sectors and our exposures to those. And then, aligned with that, we've committed, we've obviously a number of external commitments, but also we've committed to setting science-based targets, which means we're going to have to start disclosing against that. So that has been, that's work that you don't see, but if you don't do it and you don't get it right, in terms of your reporting, you would be let down.
It's very useful, and lots of useful tips, I'm sure, there for companies to try and understand what's best practice. I'm conscious of the term that's used all the time. Another overused term is the journey. We're all on a journey here, although I think, as somebody said to me recently, it's a little bit more like a pilgrimage. I'm hoping at the end of it that it's something wonderful, but I do suspect that the journey is every time we get towards the top of the hill, actually we're going to realize that there's a little bit higher. So maybe, Gemma, you got to get your perspective on that, as to those companies. We always say, get on the journey, start that journey of uncertainty, as you described it. But what do you see coming down the road? What's the next little maybe top of the hill that we're going to see as we come along in terms of climate disclosure?
Absolutely, and I do like to talk about uncertainty and embracing uncertainty, because not just within climate change but also within this landscape and with things that are happening so fast, you have to be prepared for what's coming and be resilient to all of it. I think in terms of what to look out for and where we see some of the biggest movements, we talked a little bit about the work at FRAG, and at the very beginning Shay mentioned some work around the IFRS Foundation. I think for us that's something that's very key. George mentioned the double materiality perspective, and we've both said it's not one or the other, they are complementary, they're both incredibly important. And as George mentioned, actually they exist because there is a requirement for slightly different technical reporting requirements to address the different needs of the different users and the different purposes of that data. So we understand that it's quite frustrating for companies, and there's lots of data sets that you have to draw on, and it's not as streamlined or as easy as one would hope it would be. But there is a reason sometimes why that is. And I think in terms of the IFRS Foundation, we're expecting them to announce the International Sustainability Standards Board, another acronym, in November. We're hoping to hear that announcement coming. Just as a background, that's happened very, very quickly. Only a few years ago, we were talking to the IFRS and they said, we're purely financial reporting, and very quickly this whole process has happened alongside what's happening in Europe as well. And what I would be aware of for this particular progress, so CDSB has been working with as part of the technical readiness working group at the IFRS Foundation alongside the Value Reporting Foundation, so SASB and Integrated Reporting Council previously, and the World Economic Forum and the TCFT are all part of the Technical Readiness Working Group. And we're looking at kind of getting what we can do to try and help the IFRS get started. And all of the standards, and we've seen this from EFRAG when they released their climate prototype standards a month ago. We released a kind of climate prototype standard at the end of last year as well, that's hopefully going to be fitting into this whole process. And what you'll notice about both of those standards is they are very much aligned with and are founded in the TCFD. In the same structure as the TCFD, using the same sort of language. There are differences and nuances, and then as George said, it's about taking what already exists and just finessing it and making sure that it's fit for purpose, making sure that it goes through the proper due diligence process of becoming a standard. So in terms of kind of being aware of that, companies need to, if you're not started with TCFD, I strongly recommend, if it's not through mandatory reporting, through this standard setting process, there will be some form of mandatory disclosure coming your way. But also be prepared for climate being the first, but all of these standards will very quickly expand out to broader environmental issues and social issues too. But if you understand and are trying to apply the structure of the TCFD, you will be ready, as you mentioned, Brian, and you will be ready for the future mandatory requirements. So getting started is that's what I would suggest.
And I think one of the points for a lot of our audience who may not be, let's say, at the level of maturity where they are being asked either by investors, but who may be trying to anticipate what's coming down the track, the standards that CDSB are setting, and also which are going to, as we discussed earlier, they're going to trickle down through the value chains, through the supply chains, because that's a key part, as Sarah has mentioned, of, you're asking, you need to engage with your supply chain now to be able to address these, or your portfolio. So if the banks or the investors or whoever is going to ask you, so even if it's not hitting you right now, it's a great place to look and see what's coming down a very rapidly evolving path, as you pointed out. So thank you, Gemma. George, just to get your final thoughts on what we're seeing in terms of the next up. What's that next little over the hill that you think we're going to have to address?
I concur with Gemma. There's going to be definitely a big move towards mandatory disclosure on the sustainability side. But I think there's also going to be improved sustainability disclosure expected within financial reporting. So it's kind of that two-side, and the term double materiality will be ringing in a lot of people's ears in months and months to come. But it's both sides kind of being stronger, being more mandatory, which is going to allow companies to understand not only some of the things that they're doing great, also some of the things that they can improve on. So for me, it's about making sure that you think about these changes, about how you're going to maybe have to look at reporting on things you haven't done before. But if you're able to look at it not only as we have to do this, that it's something that will benefit your company as you start to understand these impacts that your company has externally, then you'll be able to take advantage of that. And I truly believe that companies that understand what their impact is are better prepared and more resilient as they move into the future, with that comfortable uncertainty. I think that's been mentioned a number of times.
Yeah, it's a hugely important point, George. I mean, we've gone in ESG reporting from, listing all our ISO certifications to what is the value impact? I see the UK government new procurement guidelines. It's that very thing. They're asking companies to disclose what impact they're having, the social impact, and what impact they're going to have through their projects. So I think the evolution of sustainability has gone from, yeah, we have that badge and that certification, and yeah, this is what we do internally, to what is our external value delivery. So think about that in terms of your reporting. So Sarah, fascinated just to get your final thoughts on how are you preparing for what's coming down the line in terms of, the governance of the organization and grappling with all of these.
Yeah, I suppose I'd probably make 2 points. The first is that still a challenge is the proliferation of frameworks and mandatory voluntary reporting. We would absolutely advocate for consistent and comparable reporting. It makes, it just makes sense. And enables greater transparency and read across, which is a good thing. I think also, in terms of just overall reporting, as we continue to enhance disclosures, just aligning absolutely with your overall corporate reporting in AIB, the sustainability reporting now follows the same route to market as the AF4. So it has the same level of governance, group disclosures committees, board committees, sustainability committees. It makes it slightly onerous at times, but it has then the same rigor as the financial reporting, which again, as we get further into potential integration, is a good thing. So we're getting ready for it, belt and braces.
I sincerely hope you get your wishes about greater alignment. As I said, my own personal opinion is that because this is such a competitive, dynamic area, that once you get to that top of the hill, there's going to be another hill to climb after that. But again, hopefully all going in the right direction and helping to address the key issues. Shay, just to get your last thoughts, I know you've been looking at the questions, and apologies if you've asked questions. We are coming towards the end, but is there anything that strikes you from that? I was interested to get your thoughts as well on what you see most companies doing, but anything from either the questions or the comments that... Yeah,
just to my own thoughts firstly, I suppose what we're seeing with companies is that it's, sorry, apologies, is that it's really a journey. Like, don't just respond to SASB because it looks like a nice table and it's easy to do. Set out a plan. It won't happen in this year's report. 3 years, is what we're working with companies on, that 3-year roadmap and plan. And don't get too bogged down by it. It all comes back to your initiatives and what you're doing internally and the metrics there. And I think if you're solid on those and what they mean to your business, then a lot of this reporting information will start to flow.
It's a really good point. We very often find a lot of our clients think that the reporting or the certification is the be all and end all. That's actually the output of the process. So getting all of your initiatives and the work on the ground done first will have you much better set up for whatever framework or questionnaire or a ratings agency comes knocking. Get your core foundations and your own initiatives built, and then you'll be ready for whatever comes down the road. Sorry, thank you.
Okay. We're sharing here. A couple of great questions and specifically looking at the regulation. Quiva asked, does the EU human rights and environmental due diligence legislation, where does that sit? And I know, George, you spoke about the updates to the standards. I'm not sure if you can shed any light on that. I know from my presentation, I focused more on the sustainable finance and the kind of reporting legislation and regulation, but I know there's a lot more out there.
Yes, I'm very conscious of time, but you're right. There is a lot more, and these sort of regulations and changes changes in importance, but focus. A lot of these things have been incorporated and are part of the reason why human rights disclosures are mandatory when reporting on your general disclosures in GRI. So it's really bringing that deeper into our framework, because it is, of course, getting more and more focus from specific stakeholders.
Brilliant. And I think, do we have one more time?
Possibly not, but we go for it if it's a short one.
I'm just going to answer it. There was a question around what's mandatory reporting in Ireland. Is it just the EU or are there national initiatives? So it is just the EU. It's the Non-Financial Reporting Directive at the moment. That's obviously going to be trumped by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, but that hasn't happened yet. So that's going to apply to a much wider group of companies, but at the moment it's still sitting there with the largest companies.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about this as a group beforehand. Some European countries have stepped a little ahead, so do their own thing, and others are applying very strict alignment with the EU standards. I think in Ireland we'll have a particularly unique set of challenges because of Brexit and UK legislation. They're doing their own thing, and so we'll be having to try and align with both standards largely. So hopefully more alignment challenges. So finally, just for me, just to say thank you to you all. If you have any further questions, if there's anything we didn't get to answer, please contact us. We'd be happy to address your questions or put you in contact with today's participants. Which brings me just finally to say thank you so much to Gemma, George, and Sarah. We could talk about this for at least another hour, and I'm sure lots of questions. But I think your personal insights and expertise hopefully gave people hope, and that at least as they climb this mountain, that they're climbing the right mountain and that they're on the right journey. So thank you all for joining us. Keep tuned. We'll obviously, we're eagerly awaiting our CDP scores, which will be out in December. And we'll be publishing our report early in the new year. So look forward, enjoy the rest of Climate Finance Week. Thanks to Shay and to Grania for organizing this, and look forward to seeing you all, hopefully face to face a little bit more over the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.